February 2nd, 2008 Podotko settlement in Zlatust, Chelyabinsk region. Around 9 a.m., Galina Kravtsova, the caretaker of the local cemetery, had already arrived at work and started lighting the stove. The temperature is above zero, but spring hasn't fully arrived and some snow remains. Galina put more firewood into the stove and closed the door when she heard the front door open. She turned around. On the threshold stood Mikhail, a familiar worker from the railway station. The man was holding a strange elongated object in his hands, and at first Galina didn't even realize that it wasn't a thing, but a person. A child, a girl in a coat, grey tights and one winter boot. "I found her on the tracks," the man said. "She was lying near the pole and there was blood around and bloody tracks leading from the tracks. I don't know how long she was lying there like that, maybe all night." Galina's heart almost jumped out of her chest. "Alive!" she burst out. When the man nodded, she rushed to him to take the girl from his arms. "Give her here, we need to warm her up. Call the police quickly." At the time, neither Galina nor her friends knew the girl found on the tracks would be the only survivor of Nikolai Mozgliakov, the maniac who, on that very day, would become known throughout the Chelyabinsk region by the nickname Zlatust Spider. This crime is still considered one of the most brutal among crimes against children committed in the southern Urals. It was solved in record time, just 10 days. Nikolai Mozgliakov was born in 1984 in the village of Podotko, Chelyabinsk region. He was the middle of 3 children. Even before Nikolai was born, his father left the family and his mother soon remarried. Details about how their relationship developed are conflicting. According to Denis Mozgliakov, Nikolai's older brother, their stepfather treated them well, helped them with their studies, and raised his wife's children from her first marriage as his own. Other sources say the stepfather disliked Nikolai and often punished, beat and humiliated him. The mother not only didn't stop her husband, but also supported his behavior, punishing her middle son for the slightest misdeeds. One day, for some misbehavior, she tied Nikolai to the bed and called her 2 other sons. She told them that Kolka needed to be punished in a way he would remember for a long time. "Kick him with your feet and harder," the woman ordered. The boys couldn't disobey their mother. Nikolai remembered the pain and humiliation for life. Nikolai did poorly in school and dropped out completely after the 6th grade. The boy wasn't interested in knowledge, he didn't want to study or get a profession. It was much more interesting to spend time outside. There were groups, older friends and other kids from troubled families, some of whom had already been in prison. This bad crowd soon dragged Nikolai in as well. At 14 he committed his first crime, a theft, and was sent to serve his sentence at the Atlianskaya Juvenile Correctional Facility in his native Chelyabinsk region. After being released, Mozgliakov soon committed another crime, another theft, and ended up behind bars again. The 3rd sentence didn't take long to follow either. He served his sentence for a fight involving a bladed weapon and causing serious bodily harm until the end of 2007. Nikolai Mozgliakov was of rather small stature, and this fact worked against him in prison. While serving his sentence, Mozgliakov was considered an outcast, meaning he belonged to the lowest caste in the prison hierarchy. He was repeatedly subjected to sexual abuse and physical assaults by his cellmates. The skinny and short guy couldn't defend himself, so he had to endure it and dream of revenge in silence. It was in one of the colonies that Mozgliakov got his tattoos. He had a spider inked on his hand and a turtle on his shoulder. There is also information that, while in prison, he suffered a traumatic brain injury. Perhaps its consequences affected his personality. After his 2007 release, Mozgliakov tried for a while to find work and organize his personal life. But there were few people willing to hire a 3-time convicted repeat offender with no education or work experience. Mozgliakov returned to his usual occupation, stealing, which helped him make ends meet for a while. In addition, he got by with odd jobs, helped out at construction sites, and worked as a carpenter at a local private business. In March 2008, after losing hope of finding work in his hometown of Zlatust, Mozgliakov went to Moscow to earn money, but failed. In Moscow, people also disliked seeing someone with a theft record. His return home was overshadowed by a new misfortune. Right at the train station, Mozgliakov had his bag with his passport and tickets home stolen. Luckily, he had some money and a passport copy, so he could buy a return ticket and go home. Irritation and anger built up inside him for only a short time. By April 1, 2008, the Zlatust spider was already out hunting. Everything happened in a private sector on the slope, located in a loop of railway tracks, far from the center of Zlatust. Residential houses, a couple of businesses, a school. The area was quiet. Strangers are rarely seen here. Mozgliakov took advantage of this quiet, hiding in one of the abandoned houses. That day, 3 girls, Anya Liutaya, her sister Lera Liutaya, and their friend Anya Muknatkina were walking home from school as usual. The 2 Anyas were in 7th grade together, while the younger Lera was a 1st grader. The girls always waited for each other and walked home from school together. Their route took them across the railroad tracks and then along a path leading home. The neighborhood was safe, so children could go out on their own without fear. The girls walked through the melting snow, chatting about something and paying no attention at all to what was happening around them. They didn't pay attention to the rapidly approaching footsteps behind them either. When a man's hand grabbed Lera from behind and another pressed a knife to her throat, all 3 girls seemed to turn to stone. "Scream and I'll cut your friend's throat," the criminal warned coldly. "I'm serious." The girls shook their heads. They have no intention of screaming. "Go." Mozgliakov jerked his chin toward the nearby Magpie Cemetery. "And hurry up before I change my mind." The girls walked along the familiar path. Trembling with fear, Mozgliakov wanted to quickly lead his future victims to a deserted place. He was practically dragging Lera, looking around nervously. His blood was boiling, and he was trembling with anticipation and excitement. If someone noticed him, he was done for. If one of the girls tried to run, he was done for. But the girls were too scared. They could feel that the criminal wasn't joking. He really would slit Lera's throat. Both of them surely understood where Mozgliakov was taking them, but they couldn't do anything about it. The girls resigned themselves to their fate. They obediently walked to the place of their death. Finally, all 4 of them reached the cemetery. Here, Mozgliakov felt calmer. The place was deserted, as if nobody would pass by. He turned to the girls and ordered them to stay put, then began tying little Lera to a tree. When he finished, he began pulling down the girl's tights. Mozgliakov's intentions were clear. He held a knife to the victim's throat, but the girl was hardly resisting anyway. The shock was so strong that she didn't even feel the cold, and Mozgliakov didn't feel it either. He was aroused by the fact that the other girls were watching them, aroused by the thought of his own superiority. A satisfied smile appeared on his lips, a terrible smile that would later haunt Lera in her nightmares. After finishing the assault, Mozgliakov stabbed Lera with a knife. She screamed, then closed her eyes and stopped moving, losing consciousness. Mozgliakov thought she was dead. He stabbed her hard in the neck, then untied her and stabbed her several more times in the back. After that, he turned to Anna, Lera's sister, who was petrified with horror. Grabbing her by the sleeve of her coat, he pushed the girl toward the tree. "If you scream, I'll stab you too." Anna didn't scream. When Mozgliakov started tying her to the tree, little Lera came to her senses from traumatic shock. She didn't feel any pain, but she was scared. She understood that if the criminal turned around, he would see her and most likely start stabbing again, and then she wouldn't be able to run away. Lera quickly grabbed her backpack of textbooks, crawled away, then got up and left. Mozgliakov turned around. The criminal's first impulse was to catch up with the girl and stab her, but he saw that she was wandering slowly and constantly stumbling. Besides, another victim was already in his hands, another amusement, and Mozgliakov was excited again. Perhaps he decided that the girl wouldn't get far. After all, she was badly wounded and bleeding heavily. Or maybe excitement simply overpowered caution. In any case, he tied Anya to a tree and assaulted her, after which he took the knife again and started stabbing the girl in the chest and neck. Anya was completely helpless in the hands of the criminal. She couldn't resist. She died on the spot. The second Anya met the same fate. After wiping the knife on the snow and smoking where his victims died, Mozgliakov tore a chain from one dead girl and put it in his pocket. After that, he went home. When the girls' parents returned from work and found that the children were not at home, they immediately sensed that something was wrong. Classes ended a while ago. Even if the girls stopped by the store, they should have returned by now. Both mothers rushed to the school, and soon after, one girl's father arrived too. The children were not at the school. Panic instantly rose in the parents' chests. They didn't want to believe something awful happened, but it had. Someone called the police. And together with the officers, the parents went again to the girls' home, just in case they had returned while the parents were at the school. But the house was still quiet and empty. The mothers started going around the houses, asking friends and neighbors, but no one had seen the girls, no one knew where they could have gone. The search lasted until late, almost until midnight. The parents returned home in despair, ready to go out searching again in the morning and to keep searching until the children were found. But the morning of April 2nd, 2008 brought terrible news. The youngest girl, Lera, barely alive and bleeding, was found on the tracks by a railway station worker. He brought her to the cemetery caretaker's hut and called the police. The girl was exhausted after spending the night in the snow clutching her backpack. When brought to the caretaker's hut, she could barely move. Only later, when Lera felt warmth and began to recover, did she start to move and moan. That's when the cemetery worker noticed that the girl's tights were covered in blood. Police were called right away and investigators started searching. At the place where Lera was found near the pole, there were clear traces of blood leading off toward the forest. They started the inspection from this spot. The investigators moved along the path leading to the cemetery. Clear tracks soon appeared on the thawing snow and soggy ground. 3 pairs of children's shoes, 1 pair of men's. The investigators took a closer look. By the position and depth of the tracks, it was clear that the man was dragging one girl in front of him, while the other 2 girls were walking beside him on their own. Soon, one of the investigators noticed scattered textbooks lying on the snow, and then everyone saw the lifeless, bloody and stabbed bodies. The news of the terrible crime instantly spread throughout the entire region. At the scene of the incident arrived the regional prosecutor Alexander Voitovich, the head of the investigative committee under the prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation for the Chelyabinsk region Pavel Chiurin, and the head of the regional main directorate of internal affairs Pavel Grigoriev. An immediate order was given to catch the criminal while the trail was still hot, to find the monster without delay. Andrei Morozov, who headed the investigative department of the Zlatust Investigative Committee in 2008, recalled, "We were told, if you don't solve the crime within 2 weeks, you can all submit your resignations as a department." Investigators did their best. While the parents of the murdered schoolgirls were going mad with grief, the parents of other children were going mad with anxiety. Many village children attended school. Since cancelling classes wasn't an option, parents still took their kids to school. Parents would bring their children by car or literally lead them by the hand, walk them to the school doorstep and leave, only to come back for them later. After classes, children were not allowed to leave the school on their own. Teachers constantly watched over their charges and didn't let them go anywhere without supervision. Many will continue to worry about their children even after the maniac is caught. The fears will subside only closer to the new school year. Nikolai Mozgliakov himself closely followed the news on television. He was frightened and angry that little Lera survived, but he hoped that the girl wouldn't be able to remember his face. If she did, he was definitely done for. Mozgliakov understood that he needed to behave as naturally as possible so as not to arouse suspicion. He still left the house looking for work and even attended the girl's funeral. They were buried in the same cemetery near which he had taken their lives. Mozgliakov blended in with the grieving crowd, feigning sympathy and lamenting, "What cruelty, what a monster." He even placed flowers on the coffin of one of the girls. At that time, Mozgliakov himself had a small child. Later, those close to him said Nikolai got along well with children and was well liked. No one would have ever guessed that a loving father was capable of such a brutal crime. It was very fortunate that Lera not only survived but also remembered the attacker well. As soon as the girl recovered a bit, she first said that the criminal was smiling while committing the assault, and second, she remembered a tattoo on his arm, a picture of a spider. Lera was also able to give a detailed description of the criminal. A composite sketch was made, and later it turned out to be surprisingly accurate. Investigators quickly started checking all previously convicted city residents. It was reasonable to assume that the criminal was someone local. The composite sketch was printed and distributed throughout the city and region, and also sent to neighboring areas. Meanwhile, residents of nearby areas were questioned. In total, several thousand people were questioned during the investigation, and this yielded results. Several residents immediately recalled seeing a suspicious man near the school a few days before the crime. He hung around for days, always searching for something, a resident reported. Looking at the composite sketch, the woman nodded, as if to say it was him. This could only mean one thing: the maniac planned the crime in advance. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. The criminal targeted his victims rather than attacking randomly. The theory that the criminal was someone from the village was also confirmed, all too well. He knew his way around the area, knew where to ambush the girls without being seen, and knew about the paths leading from the village to the cemetery. Soon after, a teacher from the village school recognized Mozglikov. He looks very similar. He studied here but dropped out early, the woman told the investigator. He and his family were both troubled. Nikolai Mozglikov was detained on April 11, that is, 10 days after the crime was committed. The officers came to Mozglikov's home in the evening, called Nikolai to the entrance for questioning, and then told his relatives to get ready. Mozglikov stated that this was some kind of mistake and that, of course, he had nothing to do with the terrible crime. He did not resist, took his documents, got dressed, and calmly got into the police car. When it was late in the evening and Nikolai still hadn't returned home, his mother and a close relative went to the police station. However, they were told there that no one with the last name Mozglikov had been brought to the station. The confused relatives went home, planning to return the next day. But the very next day, as soon as Mozglikov's mother stepped out of the building, she ran into a crowd of journalists. The arrest of the Zlatust spider was already known, and the Chelyabinsk press gathered at the criminal's house. "Do you know why he did it? What are you feeling?" the journalists shouted as the woman walked by with her head down. "How will you live, knowing that your son is a maniac?" Just a few days later, Mozglikov was believed, asked to resign voluntarily, and the employer did not want to keep the mother of a man who had treated 3 girls so brutally on staff. Mozglikov's relatives were also called in for questioning, but no one said anything special. He behaved as usual, showed no signs of anxiety, and showed no interest in the crime. They started showing programs on television about the deaths of 2 little girls, but Nikolai didn't show any ambiguous reactions. His brother Denis recalls, "After returning from Moscow, he would go out during the day looking for a job. He only came home in the evening, around 8 post-meridian, but I don't know where he was going." A search of the Mozglikov's house led investigators to find a knife, later confirmed by forensic analysis as the weapon used against the girls. A pair of shoes was found, which he wore to the cemetery that day. A soil analysis would further confirm that traces of cemetery soil were found on the shoes. During the search, cigarettes of the same brand were also found as those that Mozglikov smoked at the crime scene. They also found the metal chain that the maniac tore from the neck of one of the girls. All this evidence was added to the case materials. Nikolai Mozglikov was placed in a separate cell in the detention center because the prosecutor's office feared that other inmates might want to take revenge on him. Later, Mozglikov wrote, "I was placed in solitary cell number 10, which was a punishment cell. Sunlight did not enter the cell and the incandescent lamp gave off a dim light. The overall impression was as if I had ended up in a long abandoned, dirty and untidy room. It smelled like a public restroom. Efforts to make the cell presentable failed because the floors, walls and toilet were all rotten. The cell was crawling with insects, woodlice and centipedes." He also claimed that almost all of his belongings were taken away, supposedly to be put in a separate locker, from which he could take them as needed. Miraculously, these things were lost, he would write in a letter later. During interrogation, Nikolai Mozglikov initially claimed he remembered nothing, but he couldn't fully deny his guilt. There was too much evidence, from traces of his saliva on the cigarette butt to traces of semen found on the girls. But, like many other criminals before and after him, Mozglikov still tried to feign insanity. However, the criminal soon realized he couldn't get away with it. and then he told the investigators everything. The only thing they couldn't find out was why the criminal chose these girls and why he decided not only to abuse them but also to take their lives. Mozglikov couldn't answer this question. An investigative experiment was conducted with the criminal, during which he described in detail what happened on that fateful day. He showed how he walked, how he led the girls, showed where the first body was tied up and where the second one was lying. And we were near the tree where the girl was tied up, making a secret stash. He showed us the place, we dug up the ground, and it became clear that everything happened right by that tree, said Andrei Moroz. Relatives of Mozglikov, after learning that an investigative experiment was being conducted, came to the cemetery, but the officers did not let them in. Mozglikov could have gotten nervous and refused to talk. Fortunately, the victims' relatives didn't know the date of the experiment, and the parents of the deceased were ready to tear the monster to pieces, and the officers were aware of this. Several officers were on duty at the cemetery, and the approaches to the crime scene were guarded. The results of the experiment made it clear that Mozglikov really did commit this crime. He easily oriented himself at the scene, showed how he struck the girls, and explained in what order he committed the assault and took the girls' lives. Vladimir Kazakov came to help the investigators. He had once investigated the Chikatilo case. He took charge of the investigation. Thanks to the public outcry, all criminal procedural actions were carried out extremely quickly. Exams that usually take a month or more during a regular investigation were finished here in just a few days. A comprehensive forensic psychiatric examination was conducted on Nikolai Mozglikov. It confirmed that the criminal was sane and fully understood the consequences of his actions. This meant that he could be held accountable. The Zlatustovsky Park case hearing was held behind closed doors. At the trial, Mozglikov behaved reservedly, smiled, spoke up rarely, showed no remorse for what he had done, and did not ask anyone for forgiveness. Some publications wrote that bruises were visible on Mozglikov's face and that his eyebrows had been shaved off. Mozglikov claimed that one of the detention center staff, who was mocking him, forced him to shave his eyebrows. He enjoyed humiliating me, turning me into a helpless animal. I was scared to sleep at night, often slept fully dressed and jumped at any corridor noise. Before the trial, he shaved my eyebrows and said I now looked like a maniac. Anyone who hears his words and sees me will instantly know I'm scum. That's how I appeared in court, and journalists with cameramen were filming me. It made me afraid and discouraged. I was no longer a human being in the full sense of the word. I became a creature. The defendant declined to give a final statement. On December 22, 2008, the court sentenced Nikolai Mozglikov to life imprisonment. The sentencing was made public. After all, the case was high profile and resonant. The criminal listened to the sentence surprisingly calmly, asked the judge about the conditions of serving his sentence, and then fell silent. The prosecution was satisfied with the sentence, but the victim's relatives demanded the death penalty for Zlatustovsky the Spider. Mozgliakov's relatives did not attend the trial. Nikolai Mozglikov went to serve his sentence in the now well-known Polar Owl Correctional Colony No. 18 of the Federal Penitentiary Service in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, located beyond the Arctic Circle in the village of Karp. He arrived there on March 21, 2009. He understood that he would never get out of there again, and he knew that this fourth prison term would be his last. However, it so happened that Mozglikov managed to get out of the colony, and not just once. So, in 2013, he suddenly stated that he wanted to confess to stealing audio equipment from his neighbor. For the investigative experiment, he was brought to Zlatust in handcuffs. The building entrance was cordoned off, and police blocked the press and onlookers. Many were convinced that Mozglikov made up the story about the theft just to see his relatives. After all, he surely understood that this was his only chance to see his mother, whom, despite her attitude toward him, the criminal missed very much as a child. Mozglikova didn't visit her son in the colony. It was costly, distant, and perhaps she just lacked the desire. As a result of the court hearing, Mozglikov was sentenced to 2.5 years in the colony. Taking all the actions into account, the sentence remained the same, life imprisonment. A few years later, in 2018, Mozglikov managed to get out of the colony again, this time to Moscow. He contacted the investigative department of the investigative committee in Moscow and told them that before the assault on the girls in Zlatoust, he had managed to commit a similar crime in the capital as well. On March 20th, 2008, in the entrance of a residential building on Nizhnaya Krasnoselskaya Street, he met a 12-year-old girl. Mozglyakov pulled her under the stairs, assaulted her, then fled. He was brought to Moscow for interrogations and a crime scene reenactment. Mozglyakov's guilt was proven. In addition, the victim of the attack, who was already 22 years old by that time, identified him. In 2019, the Basmany court of Moscow convicted Mozglyakov. In fact, the verdict is not available. Mozglyakov did not change it for him, but Mozglyakov still tried to appeal it. Already in 2023, Mozglyakov tried to attract attention to himself again, this time by reminding about the old case. He wrote a letter to journalists stating that he was not guilty of causing the death of 2 girls and abusing a 3rd. Mozglyakov insisted that he was forced to confess to everything under pressure, that he was beaten and humiliated, and that he was broken in the detention center. The criminal said the surviving girl knew him and had spoken to him several times, but during the investigation she claimed the attacker was a stranger. In addition, Mozglyakov stated that the examination did not prove that the knife found in his apartment was the weapon used in the crime. As for the necklace, it did not belong to either of the girls who died. It's his necklace. He bought it for his cat. It's a toy, not jewelry. The investigation used the item for its own purposes because they needed to quickly solve the high-profile case. Mozglyakov said his relatives could have seen signs of beatings on his body and face and verified his claims. They couldn't see him until January 2009, by which point most traces had healed. In December 2024, Nikolai Mozglyakov appealed his life sentence to the Supreme Court, but the appeal was not considered. After what happened, the families of the affected girls left the village. It was too hard to stay there, too difficult to walk past that terrible place every day. Lera Lyutaya fully recovered physically from the abuse, but the psychological consequences probably stayed with her for a long time, maybe even for her whole life. And what do you think about what happened? Write comments, leave likes or dislikes. I'll leave all additional materials and sources in the Strashnoti Telegram channel. Subscribe. There's a ton of extra content there.